If I go fast, we can finish this in the second video. So let's get started. Okay, so we're on 9, the anointing of Jehu. Meanwhile, the prophet Elisha called one of the young prophets and told him to get ready and go to Ramoth in Gilead. Take this jar of oil, and when you get there, look for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat. Okay, so he finds him and he says, I anoint you king over the people of Israel, and you shall strike down the house of Ahab, your master, that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male bond or free in Israel, and I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam. Okay, so she told him to go in private and pour the oil on him, and that's what he did. And he said, you're to kill your master. And then after saying this, the young prophet left the room and fled. And when he went back to the office, the other officers, they said, what did that crazy person want? And he said, he told me, the Lord proclaims, I anoint you as king of Israel. At once the fellow officers spread their clothes for Jehu to stand on and blew trumpets and shouted, no, Kitty, and shouted, Jehu is king. Kitty, take your tail. And they shouted, Jehu is king. Joram of Israel killed. Then Jehu plotted against King Joram. King Joram was recovering from wounds in Jezreel. Jehu went to see the king, and the men in the watchtower stopped him and said, do you come as a friend? And he said, none of your business, fall behind me. This happened several times with different guards. And finally, the guards called King Joram, and they told him that Jehu was in the chariot driving like a madman. So the king Joram came out on his chariot, and Jehu led him to the field that was Naboth's. And finally they stopped, and he asked him, why are you running? Do you come in peace? And he said, how can there be peace when we still have all the witchcraft and idolatry your mother Jezebel started? King Joram cried out, it's treason, and he turned his chariot around and fled. Jehu drew his bow and shot an arrow in Joram's back and pierced his heart. Joram fell dead in his chariot, and Jehu said, throw the body in the field that belonged to Naboth. The Lord spoke these words against Ahab at the time. I saw the murder of Naboth, and I promised you I would punish you here in the same field. So he kept the Lord's promise. Okay, Ahaziah of Judea killed. King Ahaziah, he fled in his chariot, went to the town of Beth-Hagen, pursued by Jehu, killed him, and Jehu ordered his men, and they wounded him, and he kept going for a while, and finally he died, and the officials took his body back to Jerusalem in a chariot and buried him in the royal tomb in David's city. Ahaziah had become king of Judah in the 11th year that Joram's son Ahab was king of Israel. Okay, so now Jezebel's violent death. Jehu arrived in Jezreel, and Jezebel heard what had happened. So she put on some eyeshadow and arranged her hair and was looking out the window of the palace. As Jehu came up to the gate, she called out, Zimri, you assassin, why are you here? Jehu looked up and shouted, who's on my side? 2 or 3 palace officials looked down at him, and Jehu said to them, throw her down. And they threw her down, and her blood splattered on the wall. And Jehu drove his horses and chariots over her body, and then he entered the palace, had a meal, and only then he said, take the cursed woman and bury her. After all, she is a king's daughter. But then the men went to bury her and found nothing except her skull and bones of her hands and feet. When they reported this to Jehu, he said, well, the Lord said what would happen when he spoke through Elijah, he said the dogs would eat Jezebel's body in the territory of Jezreel. Her remains will be scattered here like dung, so no one will be able to identify them. So I thought this was interesting. Do you remember the evil queen Jezebel from the end of 1 Kings? The story of her death is told with the drama and graphic violence. The author wanted to make a point. Those who did not obey God would be punished. After she falls to her death, she is consumed by dogs, just as Elijah the prophet prophesied. This was a great dishonor for someone who is expected to be buried in a royal tomb. The death of Queen Jezebel, King Joram, and his son, King Ahaziah of Judah, mark the end of the Omri dynasty. King Omri and his descendants all got the thumbs down from the author. They had each sinned against the Lord by worshiping foreign gods and treating the people of their kingdoms with injustice. Their violent deaths are seen as punishment for leading Israel astray. So I thought that would be a good one to add. Okay, so now we're on 10. Massacre of Ahab's descendants. There were 70 descendants of King Ahab living in Samaria. Jehu wrote a letter telling the rulers to get them together and choose the best qualified to make king and fight to defend them. The rulers of Samaria were terrified. How could we oppose Jehu when King Joram and King Ahaziah couldn't? So they sent a message to Jehu, we are at your service, ready to do what you want, but we will not make anyone king. Do what you think is best. So Jehu wrote them back and said, bring me the heads of all King Ahab's descendants at Jezreel by this time tomorrow. The 70 descendants of King Ahab were killed and their heads brought in baskets to Jehu. He instructed for the heads to be put into heaps at the city gate and left there until morning. In the morning, he went to the gate and told the people, I was the one who plotted against King Joram and killed him. You were not responsible for that. But who killed all these? This proves that everything the Lord said about the descendants of Ahab would come true, and the Lord did what he promised through the prophet Elijah. Then Jehu put to death all the other relatives of Ahab living in Jezreel and all his officers, close friends, and priests. Not one of them was left alive. So, Jehu slaughters the worshippers of Baal. Jehu assembled all the people and told them, they have served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him a lot. Bring all the prophets of Baal. He's just trying to fool them. And his priests, let none be missing. He's very cunning. I have a great sacrifice for them for Baal, and whoever is missing shall not live. All the worshipers came, and he had them put on their vestments. Then he went in to offer sacrifices, and he had 80 men outside, and told the men, the man who allows any man to escape shall forfeit his life. And then he said, go in and slay them. Let not one man escape. They brought down the pillar, and they burned the entire house of Baal. Thus Jehu wiped Baal from Israel, and the Lord said, because you have done well in carrying out what was right in my eyes, so your sons, the 4th generation, shall sit on the throne of Israel. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord. He did not turn from his sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel sin. So the Lord has to depend on somebody, and there's no perfect human, evidently. No one's really fully doing right by him. The rest of Acts of Jehu and all that he did are in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Israel. And Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Kings 11. Queen Athaliah reigned over Judah Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw her son was dead. She arose and had all the royal family killed. But the daughter of King Joram, the Ahaziah's sister, took him. His name was Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from the king's sons who were about to be slain. And she hid him and his nurse, and he was not slain. And he remained with her for 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned. Jehoiada anoints the child Joash. Joash was protected day and night until he was anointed king at 7 years old. So he was hidden and taken care of. The death of Athaliah. Queen Athaliah tore her clothes in distress upon hearing about Joash becoming anointed. The guards seized her and killed her in the palace away from the temple. And then I wanted to show you this. Protectors and defenders. The child Joash would never have survived if he had not been rescued by his aunt and guarded by the priest. Most of us don't have to worry about assassination, but we do have to face different kinds of trouble and need people around us to protect us. Sometimes this protection comes when others help us make good choices. Young people are sometimes faced with things like cheating, lying, stealing, smoking, drinking, fighting, and other risky behaviors. If you make bad choices about these things, you could get hurt and even killed. Who are the people in your life who have looked out for you, who give you guidance in making good choices to keep you from danger? Do you have friends who give you good advice? Is there an adult in your life you can really count on if this question or problem? Think about those who are protectors in your life. Let them know how important they are to you. Now, that's for children, but I really like this book for even adults. So, okay, so now, obviously, children should be protected even at the expense of ourselves. We are obligated to protect all children, especially young, not just our own. It's something we all kind of know innately. If you see a child crying out for help, seems in distress, even if you don't like the child, do God's will and intervene. No matter the cost to you or your reputation, do God's will. Do what is right. Okay. We're on 12. Are we on 12? Did we? Okay. So we're on 12. So, yeah. So the city was quiet since Athaliah had been slain at the king's house. Okay. So, reign of Jehoash and the repair of the temple. The priest Jehoiada and King Joash make a covenant with the Lord that they would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people went to the temple and tore it down, the temple Baal, and tore it down. They smashed the altars and the idols and killed the priest in front of the altars. All the people were filled with happiness that the queen was dead. Now King Joash was reigning. He reigned for 40 years. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days because Jehoiada, the priest, instructed him. However, the high places, pagan places, were not taken down and taken away. So people continued to sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. Joash told the priest to use the money to collected from the people to take care of the house and the Lord of repairs. And maintenance in 23 years, they did no repairs. So that responsibility was taken from the priests, and thereafter, the repair money was given directly to the workers for the repairs. Okay. So, hold on, I have to adjust here. So, let's see. Hazael. Oh, Kitty, you have to move. Sorry. Hazael of Syria threatens Jerusalem. King Joash gave King Hazael of Syria all the extra money in the collection so that they would not attack Jerusalem. So King Hazael led his army away from Jerusalem. And all the other acts that Joash did are recorded in the history of the kings of Judah of the Chronicles. So I thought that was good. The death of Joash. King Joash officials plotted against him. Josachar and Jehozabad killed King Joash in Jerusalem. It doesn't say how old he was, but he did have a son. Joash was buried in David's city in the royal tomb. Well, wait a minute. You could figure that out since he was 7 when he started. But anyway, he was buried in David's city in the royal tombs, and his son Amaziah succeeded him as the king of Judah. Okay, so now we're on 13. Jehoahaz reigns over Israel. And the 23rd year of the reign of Joash's son, King Ahaziah, as king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king of Israel, and he ruled in Samaria for 17 years. These are a lot of kings and all, but I'm only picking out the interesting stories. So just so you know, I'm trying to go quick. The king Jeroboam, before him, he sinned against the Lord and led Israel to sin. He never gave up his evil ways. So the Lord was angry with Israel, and he allowed King Hazael of Syria and his son King Ben-Hadad to defeat Israel time after time. Then King Jehoahaz prayed to the Lord, and the Lord, seeing how harshly the king of Syria was oppressing the Israelites, answered his prayer. The Lord sent Israel a leader who freed them from the Syrians, so the Israelites lived in peace for a while, as before, but they still did not give up the sins of Jeroboam, which led Israel to keep on committing them, and the image of the goddess Asherah remained in Samaria. King Jehoahaz had no armed forces left because the king of Syria had destroyed them. Everything else King Jehoahaz did, and all the brave deeds, are recorded in the history of the kings of Israel, the Chronicles. He died and was buried. Joash reigns over Israel. The 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, began to reign in Israel over Israel in Samaria, and he reigned for 16 years. He also did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam. He walked in them. The rest of acts of Joash and all that he did in the might for which he fought against Amaziah, king of Judah, are written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Israel. Joash died, and Jeroboam the second sat on his throne. And Joash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. The death of Elisha. When Elisha fell sick, Joash, the king of Israel, went down to him and wept before him, crying, "My father, my father." Elisha said to him, "Take a bow and arrow." And then he said to the king of Israel, "Draw the bow." And he drew it. And Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands, and he said, "Open the window and shoot." He shot the Lord's arrow of victory. Okay, next page. Sorry, kitty keeps coming. And the arrow of victory over Syria. For you shall fight the Syrians in Apec, until you have made an end to them. And he struck, and he said, "Take the arrows," and he took them, and he told him to strike the ground with them. He struck it 3 times, and then the man of God was angry with him. "You should have struck it 5 or 6 times, and you and you would have struck down Syria until you made an end. But now you will strike down Syria only 3 times. So Elisha died, and they buried him. Another man was cast into his grave near the grave of Elisha. As soon as he touched the bones of Elisha, he was revived and stood on his feet. Yeah, they had a lot of miracles, and they that was one of them too, supposedly. Okay, so Israel captures the cities from Syria. King Hazael of Syria oppressed Israel all the days of King Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion on them, and he turned toward them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them, nor has he cast them from his presence until now. So some of the kings took cities, and the next generation took them back. I'm not going to go into that blow by blow. I'm just pointing things are interesting in the ones that I come across. If it has an interesting circumstance, I'm going to bring it out. So Amaziah reigns over Judah. In the 2nd year of Joash, the son of Joahaz, king of Israel, Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old and reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. But the high places were not removed, meeting the pagan sacrifice places were still there. As soon as the royal power was firmly in his hand, he killed his servants who killed his father, but he did not put to death the children of the murderers, according to what is written in the book of Moses, where the Lord commanded, the father shall not be put to death for the children, and the children should not be put to death for the father. Each man shall die for his own sin. So he killed 10,000 Edomites, and his son Jeroboam succeeded him in death. So all that says all that. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go blow by blow. You're not, it's just not interesting enough. Jeroboam reigns over Israel. He reigned for 41 years. Not really too much here for him. All that he did is in the Chronicles. So, Azariah reigns over Judah. The son of Jeroboam II began to reign when he was just 16 years old, and he reigned for 52 years in Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, except he had not taken away the high places for pagan sacrifices. So the Lord struck the king and said he was a leper till the day of his death, and he dwelt in a separate house. And the rest of his acts are in the book of Chronicles for kings of Judah. And his son Jotham succeeded him. Zechariah reigns over Israel. Zechariah, son of Jeroboam II, and reigned for 6 months, and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel sin. You see how it's repeat? That means it's very important. So what happened to him and why he reigned such a short time, sorry, kitty, was Shalom conspired against him and struck him down and killed him. All the acts he did are written in the book of Chronicles. This was the promise of the Lord which he gave to Jehu, your son shall sit upon the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. And so it came. Shalom reigns over Israel. After killing Zechariah, he reigned for 1 month in Samaria. Then Menahem killed him. The rest of his deeds and the conspiracy, are written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Israel. Mayhem reigns over Israel. Mayhem. Everything is mayhem in this book of Kings. I can't wait till we're done this one. Mayhem reigned 10 years in Samaria, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel sin. Again, a repeat. And he took money from wealthy men of Israel to give to the king of Syria. Wow. That sounds like our current politicians, doesn't it? And the rest of his deeds are in the book of Chronicles of Kings of Israel. And his son Pekah succeeded him in death. So Pekah reigns over Israel. Pekah reigned in Samaria, over Israel and Samaria for 22 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel sin. Another repeat. An officer in King Pekahiah military and his son Pekah plotted with 50 men from Gilead and assassinated him in the palace. And then his son succeeded him as king. Pekah reigned over Israel for 20 years. He sinned against the Lord, followed the wicked example of King Jeroboam, who led the Israel to sin. Another repeat. His cities were taken over by the king of Syria, and he took Israelites as prisoners. So Jodham, son of the king of Judah, plotted against King Pekah, and assassinated him and succeeded him as king. Everything else that King Pekah did is recorded in the history of the kings of Israel. So Jodham reigns over Judah. He was 26 years old, and he reigned for 16 years. And Jodham did what was pleasing to the Lord, but the pagan places to worship were still not destroyed. But it was Jodham who built the north gate of the temple of God. Everything else he did is recorded in the history of the kings of Judah. His son Ahaz succeeded him as sin. Ahaz reigns over Judah. Ahaz began his reign at 20 years old and reigned for 16 years. He did what was not pleasing to the Lord. He seemed particularly evil. He abused sacred objects. He even sacrificed his own son to a burnt offering of idols, imitating the disgusting practice at the pagan places of worship. And all that he did, and this is all he did, or this is some of what he did. All of what he did. Oh, we're just about right there at the end. Okay. And all that he did is recorded in the Chronicles. And his son Hezekiah succeeded him as king. And a lot of people have heard of Hezekiah. Okay, so Hosea, I'll just say, reigns over Israel. In the 12th year of the King Ahaz of Judah, Hosea, the son of Elah, became the king of Israel. He ruled in Samaria for 9 years. He sinned against the Lord, but not as much as the sins of Jehoram of Israel before him. He stopped the annual payment to Emperor Shalmaneser of Syria, who he had surrendered to, and was arrested and put in prison. So they put him in prison. The kings of Israel leads to deportation. Then in the 9th year of King Hosea, Shalmaneser invaded Israel and then besieged Samaria. And he took the Israelites to Assyria as prisoners. Samaria fell because the Israelites sinned against the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the king of Egypt and led them out of Egypt. And they worshipped other gods and adopted customs introduced by the kings of Israel. The Israelites did things that the Lord their God disapproved of. They built pagan places of worship, built pagan images, and aroused the Lord's anger with their wicked deeds. The Lord sent his messengers and prophets to warn Israel. Judah, abandon your evil ways, obey my commands, which I gave you and your ancestors, but they did not obey. They were stubborn, like their ancestors, who have not trusted the Lord their God. They did keep the covenant. They did not keep the covenant, and they disregarded his warnings and worshipped worthless idols and became worthless themselves. They left only the kingdom of Judah. This left only the kingdom of Judah, but even the people in Judah did not obey the laws of the Lord their God. They adopted customs by the people of Israel, and the Lord rejected the Israelites. And he punished them and handed them over to cruel enemies until the last he had vanished from his sight. Jeroboam is mentioned many times over, so I think he particularly angered the Lord. Then the Assyrians settled in Israel, and strangely the emperor of Assyria told them that the lions were killing the people over there. So he said, send back one of the priests we have brought as a prisoner. Have him go back and live there in order to teach the people the law of God of that land. So Israelite priests who had been deported from Samaria went and lived in Bethel, where he taught the people how to worship the Lord. But some of the people who Jews settled in the area continued to make their own idols and put the shrines of the Israelites and bought and eat that the signs of Israelites had built. Each different group made idols in the city. They were living in Israel, and to this day, some people there worship the Lord to this day. But they also worship their idols, and the descendants continue to do the same. No, I'm not going to end. I'm going to end on some hope. So, the king, Hezekiah, one of the good guys, he's even compared to the great King David, who is thought of as the most king ever. So we're going to go over here, page 478. Where are we? Okay. Just basically monkey see, monkey do. The people have a funny habit of imitating another's behavior, and they use this to the advantage of kids to teach them about behavior. So, and okay, so I wanted to leave on hope because this is coming up. Each king is named one, and the author tells either that he has sinned against the Lord or he did what was not pleasing to the Lord. The kings who worshipped only God resisted the pagan gods, treated people fairly, and destroyed their idols and altars are the good guys. King Hezekiah, coming up, is one of the good guys. He's even compared with the great King David, who was thought of as the most faithful and most devoted to the Lord of any king ever. This doesn't mean that King Hezekiah's life was without problems. The Assyrians tried to conquer the kingdom of Judah after taking over the northern kingdom of Israel. Because Hezekiah turned to God and relied on the advice of the prophet Isaiah, the Assyrians eventually turned away. But Hezekiah got a great scare. So, how's that for ending on a bang with some hope? So I just wanted to end like that. I know that the kings were a little bit crazy, and I'm glad to be done with all that violence and chaos, that up and down. I'm looking forward to Isaiah, and a lot of us know him. And he's about to come onto the scene. And also with the mention of Our Lady, who will crush the head of Satan. So how's that for hope? So then the next period we're going to be going into is exile. So that's where we will end.